skies, on whom we wait. Thou who art ever nigh, guarding with watchful eye, to thee aloud we cry, God save the state. At this time, I'll invite Bob Chapman to come forward.
Oh, we got a nice crowd here this morning. Good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to our Veterans Day services here at St. John's. I'm going to address the veterans first here. As a veteran, I sometimes find myself curiously uncomfortable when somebody comes up to me and says, "Thank you for your service." I'm sure you guys have the same feelings. I kind of struggle with it. If I say nothing, it seems kind of ignorant to do that, and I'm not pleased with that. I said thank you for quite some time, and that still kind of didn't make it either. It didn't rest well with me. So I started with an experiment that the last couple of months I decided to try something new. And I've had mixed reactions with it. A lot of people, I've got no reaction. But there are a couple of reactions that really have stood out in my mind. One was a young man. It was at a checkout, and I replied to him. He said, "Thank you for your service." And I told him, "You are worth it." And he got teared up and really thanked me profusely. It seemed he was so surprised. Another was an older lady, same reaction. So after thinking about it, I'm going to keep doing that, because that seems to be the best response I've been able to come up with. Today, I'm going to tell you my story. There were 5 of us who ran together as teenagers. We grew up in the old First Ward, around the Perry Projects. We called ourselves the Foxy Five, which in our teenage minds thought, hey, that's pretty cool. There was me, and there was my best friend Butch, and there was Bobby, Rich, and Billy. We all served in the armed forces. This was in 1964, long time ago. 3 of us went to Vietnam. Only 2 of us came home. Bobby did not come home. Whenever the traveling wall comes here, I seek out Bobby's name, and I stop, I say a prayer, and my mind drifts back to our teenage years, and I feel sad. Out of our population here in the United States, less than 2% actually step up to put on the uniform of the armed forces. And out of our total population, only about 7, perhaps 8% have ever served in the armed forces of this great country that we have. We are set apart. We stand in the gap. We protect. We protected, we protect, we serve the many. Just as Jesus has called us to serve the same way he came to serve. Out of those who have served in the armed forces for many years and many wars, it is the Vietnam veterans who are ostracized and forgotten. We were spat on, we were called all kinds of names, we were shut out from society. So as a defense mechanism, we hid our service to avoid the shame and humiliation that we had experienced when we came home. For many years in my workplace, over 30 years, it wasn't until after the Gulf War that anybody there even knew that I had served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. We hid away. The Gulf War came, and it was the Vietnam veterans who stepped forward to ensure that no more veterans would go through that ever again. The population has changed its treatment of Vietnam veterans for the most part. We as a group now greet one another with a welcome home, the welcome home we never got. There have been efforts during the 50th year memorials of the Vietnam War to rectify this injustice, and it has healed some of the old wounds. But the pain, it still remains. If not for the faith that I have in Jesus, it would have consumed me and left me mired in my self-pity, in my alcoholism. He lifted me out of my lowlands and gave me a new life. The year was 1964. My best friend Butch was encouraging me to join the Marines with him on the buddy system. He lived with his grandma and his aunt and his uncle. His uncle was a hardened Marine, and he worked on Buddy for years, and Buddy was convinced he wanted to be a Marine. Then one day out on the corner, we all hung out on the corner in those days, one of the older guys from the neighborhood came home on leave, and he was wearing those dress blues. And those dress blues had a big effect on a couple of 17-year-old kids, I'm telling you. Buddy worked on me for a long time. Butch worked on me for a long time, and I gave in. These two 17-year-olds were off to Parris Island and boot camp. It was July of 1964, the hottest time of the year. We made it through boot camp. It was not easy, I'm telling you. We were both then sent to Camp Geiger for combat training in the late fall. After that, we both ended up stationed at Camp Lejeune. And I'm sure you've all seen the commercials and read about the tainted drinking water at Camp Lejeune. We are all suffering health effects in our later years because of that. It was in North Carolina, Camp Lejeune. Vietnam was just starting to get some attention. It was mainly on the back pages at that time. We both received our orders to go to Vietnam. It was then that we were separated. I had lost my only connection to my youth, and it was hard at first to not have someone to connect with from home, and all the anxiety and trepidation that you feel when you're going off to war. You have all of these images and dreams and concepts of what war is going to be like, and then you get there and it's nothing like you thought it was going to be. From there, it was off to California for advanced combat training, and we went to survival school there, which was led by a British Marine. It was probably one of the hardest things I ever did. It had it had training with survival and also a prisoner of war camp, where they actually took you prisoner, captured you, and you were endeavored to try to escape. And that was not an easy thing to do. That was at Camp Pendleton. From Pendleton, we took the long flight, stopping at Hawaii and Wake Island, and then landing in Okinawa. In Okinawa, it was chaos. There was guys going back and forth all the time. And the phrase but there was, "Are you going down south?" Going down south meant you were going to Vietnam. We arrived in Vietnam by flight at the Da Nang airfield, and the heat was so intense, it took your breath right away. There was the pungent smell of nuc mam. Nuc mam is a fish oil that's common to Vietnamese cuisine, and it was everywhere. It was overwhelming. At first, I saw air-conditioned barracks and guys walking around in civilian clothes. And out loud I said, "This isn't going to be so bad." Then the Marine that was there to pick us up said, "This isn't for you new guys. We got a long way to go before we reach our lines." It snapped us out of it. Getting out to our lines, we set up to a routine of digging mortar trenches in the intense heat and setting up a perimeter with concertina wire and installing minefields. At that point, we were approached by a non-typical gunnery sergeant. Now, he was a small Mexican-American man from Southern California, and he was not like any gunny that I had ever encountered. All the gunnies that I had encountered up to that point were like the prototypical character as seen in the movie Full Metal Jacket, as portrayed by R. Lee Ermey. Now, Gunny, he had a plan. He was offering us a chance to volunteer for his special project on our off time to kill the boredom. Daytime was relatively quiet. Nighttime was when the Viet Cong came out to play, and every night was like the 4th of July. Tracer rounds everywhere. The UH-1 Huey helicopters and the AC-41 gunship aircraft, which were nicknamed Puff the Magic Dragon, would swoop in and send tracer rounds in the jungle tree lines. At this time, Gunny was sharing his faith with us as we worked in the intense heat. I took him up on his offer. That was a turning point in my life. We set out borrowing, begging, and sometimes just taking, forgive us, blown up truck axles and other parts, along with 50-gallon drums, which we cut in half to form the seats of what was to become a merry-go-round that we built and painted up, and we installed it at the Amer Asian Orphanage. These children were shunned by the Vietnamese because they were born of American GIs and Vietnamese women, and some left over from when the French occupied Vietnam. The nuns at the orphanage, they threw a big party for us. There were all sorts of Vietnamese foods. There was many tears and many thanks. My memory of that dinner was, I had always prided myself on being able to eat hot food. But they had a pepper there that took me right to my knees. I'm telling you. There were armed forces and other press people there who took photos and wrote up about what was happening. Upon checking with my parents here, the mainstream newspapers here in the U.S. never reported these things. But the armed forces newspapers did. Now, this was a template for the humanitarian efforts that were used later on in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, my grandson, who's still serving in the Army. He is an officer now down in Washington, D.C. At that time, was a staff sergeant in Afghanistan. And he led up the humanitarian efforts in Afghanistan. He also was in Iraq and in North Africa. And he told me it was those things that we did in Vietnam that set up the template and the way that they went about doing their humanitarian efforts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and in North Africa. He remains an officer in the Army now. My father also served in World War II, as well as his brothers. One of his brothers, my uncle, was severely wounded in World War II. He had a plate in his head, and he died from his wounds in the 1950s when I was a boy. I have two grandsons who have served. One that I spoke of is career Army and is an officer in Washington, D.C. The other served in Iraq and is suffering from PTSD and has been discharged. My father passed away in December of 1983. My mother passed away in January of 2009. I handled all the arrangements, and along with my brothers, we settled her meager estate, sharing with everyone and no disagreements. Unbelievable. I was left with a box of stuff, and it remained on a shelf in my basement until very recently. In the box were many old photos of long-lost relatives, along with the letters that my father wrote to my mother from the war. There was also his DD-214, but I don't think they called it a DD-214 back then. It was called the Enlisted Record and Report of Separation Honorable Discharge. It's worn and faded, and along with his discharge, it's worn and faded. There was also this blue box that I had never seen, even as a child. And it has ribbon bar. You guys know what this is. Good conduct medal. Has a lock of hair. I believe this is my little brother's. And there's European medals. In his DD-214, I was going over these medals and trying to see what they were. But I noticed on a DD-214, he was awarded the Bronze Star. That wasn't here. I know my brother took that. Now, my father never talked about the war, but in these letters and awards, I learned a little bit about my father's service. I learned that he was one of the combat engineers who landed and cleared the beach for the D-Day invasion, for which he was awarded a commendation. He landed at Omaha Beach, and you guys know Bloody Omaha. They lost a third of their men on Omaha Beach. It was the worst of the landings on D-Day. He also was a combat engineer who helped capture the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on the Rhine. If you know your history, that Ludendorff Bridge was the last bridge standing on the Rhine when they were invading Germany. I found a postcard, a picture of the Ludendorff Bridge. It was written to my mom before they were married. Now there was some stuff marked out here, and underneath here it's signed from a second lieutenant, so that he must have put something in there he wasn't supposed to. It said, here's a view of the Ludendorff Bridge, that's marked out, captured, and intact on the Rhine, and the rest of the sentence is all marked out, so they must have not wanted him to say that. There was also a really neat book here on the Combat Engineers Victory, really old. This is from the 40s. All the information on combat engineers are pretty neat. My post-Vietnam life, as I said, was mired in alcoholism and self-pity. But I eventually thought back to my time in Vietnam, and I started to go to church. I quit drinking, I quit smoking, and I've been free of both of them for over 40 years now. I volunteer in various places ever since. I have continued to use my gifts and share of my resources ever since. My former church, before I came here to St. John's, never acknowledged military service or veterans until I brought it out. I organized a Veterans Day display, and I arranged for the veterans from the congregation to bring in their ribbons, awards, photos, and anything from their service to put on display for Veterans Day. Most people, they just walked by. They didn't even pay attention. But one woman who I knew, she had twin daughters, she came up to me crying. She said, "I never knew my husband was in Vietnam until now." She hugged me. She thanked me. Her twin daughters hugged me and thanked me. They had a newfound respect and love for their father. He hid away his service just like many of us did. And fortunately, they had a chance to see this because he passed away shortly thereafter. This was a groundwork for a lifetime of service to others that followed all of us into our civilian lives thereafter. I think back on this period of my life. The only things that I share with others are precious moments in time where a glimpse of the love of Jesus peeks through in the work of imperfect people, in a time when the unspeakable horror of wartime brings out the worst of humanity. This was the start of something that changed the course of my life into a servant for the King of Kings, Jesus. Also, a lot of us received letters asking for pen pals for Vietnam veterans. So I responded to one of them, and it was for a school in Ozone Park, New York, St. Elizabeth's School, from Sister Deborah, wrote me back. She says, "Dear Bob, we are so pleased when Carol brought in your letter. She read it to the class, and now we are all busily writing to you. Your picture is going around too. Each day the news of reports of Vietnam, and one can only imagine the terror of war. One thing is certain, we are able to sit in a peaceful classroom studying the history of our country and current events because of men such as you, who are encountering the reality of preserving that heritage. These are not empty words. If you could see the faces I am looking at now, you would never underestimate the work you are doing. We would like to adopt you as our brother, so if it's all right, we promise to write again soon. Sincerely, Sister Deborah." I want to close with some scripture. By the way, this isn't just a book. It is alive. Every time you open it, it speaks to you in new and unique and powerful ways. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They will also answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you? He will reply, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did not do for those who are the least of these, you did not do for me. Also in Matthew chapter 10, if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of those little ones because he is my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward. This is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Bless you all.
Thank you, Bob. It's always interesting to see how you bring different perspective each year that we're together. And as I was listening to you this morning, I concluded in my mind, you truly are a hero to me. Not only for your service to our country, but you are truly a hero to me as a mentor in the faith. So thank you for your service. Thank you for your dedication, not only to our country, but to the church, the greater church, and helping people to see that Jesus is present even and alive and at work, even in the trenches, in the tough spots of life. So thank you. Thank you, Bob. Mayor Peterson.